was the original goal, motivation, and plan of the NPFL and later NPP? And who were their sponsors? Were there international players involved or only Liberians?
The original goal of the NPP was that which is the goal of all political parties: to galvanize and seek people's power.
To seek political power.
Correct.
Okay, I know that, you're right, everybody does that. But each person does it with a different platform, with a different heart, with a different spirit, with a different focus of ideas. So can you summarize, maybe in 1 or 2 sentences, what was the key hope that NPFL had, because that was not a political group now, and NPP, after they then left the fighting realm and came into the so-called political realm? Could we try to understand that balance a little bit?
Yeah. The NPP was a political offshoot of the NPFL, which was predominantly a fighting force. The NPFL had a military objective of removing President Samuel Doe from power. The vehicle for that removal was the NPFL. I told you on yesterday that that group comprised people from various persuasions and influences. They effectively covered every diversity, every level of diversity that you can imagine that comprised the country. Uneducated, educated, wise, crazy, sensible, black, red, white, mulatto, albino, everything that you can possibly imagine was being brought together under this umbrella of the NPFL. It was a voluntary force. Nobody, at least as far as I know, was being forcefully conscripted to join. Now, it started off predominantly with members, natives of Nimba, but mushroomed quickly to envelope people from all of the diversities that I've spoken of. So their military objective, because they were a military group, was to fight and remove President Doe. Now, at some point in the life of the NPFL, as people of other diversities and persuasions came along, and as the reality of removing President Doe from power militarily unfolded, you recall that Mr. Doe, former President Doe, was killed as early as September 9 or 10, 1990. So, for all intents and purposes, that military objective should have been realized. But no, something intervened. And that which intervened was the usual political fight for power. I stipulated in my paper that at peace conferences, resolving military issues were the easiest and quickest on the table. For some of these conferences, it didn't even take a day, because the real problems were not military, they were political. They were strategically linked to power. Who would distribute the wealth and resources of the country? Now, I said to you, as the flanks of the NPFL grew with people of all these persuasions and professions, and as the reality unfolded, it became self-evident that the route to power will no longer just be military. It will also now be political. Military organizations rarely seek political power. Now, I say rarely because you will recall that one of the presenters, I believe it was Minister Buya, has already informed you that a petition from the armed forces of Liberia was presented to President Doe. But even at that, to represent the armed forces of Liberia as their candidate in the 1985 elections. But even at that, President Doe had to create a political vehicle called a political party to drive that ambition. And so the NPFL was transformed, transmogrified into a political vehicle called the National Patriotic Party of Liberia. Now, were there elements who comprised the NPP who were not members of the NPFL? Yes. There are people who are in the NPP who subscribe to the political motivations and don't necessarily share the military, the previous military motivations. So like every other political party, the NPP sought political power. But a nexus continued to exist notwithstanding. And that nexus was some of the objectives, albeit military, some of the goals were transferred into a political motivation. One of which was, we're fighting to take Liberia out of Monrovia.
Out of what, sorry?
Monrovia. We want to make the concept of a Liberia an enveloping one to attract and hold people who up to that point knew nothing except the name of the land, but had no reason for which they could share an affection, a sense of deep passion, a sense of emotional attachment to what it was to be a Liberian, because they were excruciatingly ostracized and left out, not by any direct design, but by reason of how the nation was founded from the mainstream of knowing what it was to be a Liberian. And so those things attended and found their way, those expressions and aspirations found their way into the NPP. The NPP became, like the NPFL, a political group that cut across most, if not all, of the divides of the country. In the NPP, if I would say so, you could find people again of all competing influences and persuasions. People who even shared status of progressives, people who even were opposed to progressives, people who were natives, people who were settlers, people who, and so there was that marriage that formed the NPP. And that group went on with its standard bearer to win the 1997 elections.